So this book right here is one of a kind. It was written by a man named Viktor Frankl. As you can see from the title of the book is Man's Search for Meaning. Now, Viktor Frankl was a very renowned professor of psychology and psychiatry. Interesting story, however. Before Viktor Frankl became one of the most influential figures in psychology, he endured one of the worst human catastrophes of the 20th century. Viktor Frankl was born in 1905 in Vienna, Austria. He trained as a psychiatrist and he developed logotherapy, a therapeutic approach grounded in the idea that the primary human drive is not pleasure or power, but a search for meaning. Now, in September 1942, his life was violently interrupted. Viktor Frankl, his wife Tilly, and his parents were arrested by the Nazis and deported to Theresienstadt concentration camp. By the way, I had to Google how to pronounce that, but I'm still confident that it came out wrong. So his father soon died of starvation and illness. In October 1944, Frankl was transported through Auschwitz into a labor camp in Bavaria. His mother, brother, wife were all murdered in the Holocaust, and yet here's something that is remarkable. The remarkable part about all this is that Viktor Frankl observed something unsettling. In a place where hunger was constant, where dignity was stripped away daily, where death hovered nearby, not everyone responded the same way. Some gave up inwardly long before their bodies failed. Others, under the same brutality, somehow held on. Later, Viktor Frankl would write that the difference wasn't physical strength or intelligence or even religious belief in the traditional sense. It was meaning. And after liberation in April 1945, Viktor Frankl returned to Vienna physically broken and emotionally devastated. And yet within a year, he wrote this masterpiece right here, Man's Search for Meaning, articulating a profound insight that is encapsulated in one of the most salient lines in his book. Everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Now that insight is foundational, not just to understanding suffering in extreme conditions, but for understanding psychological pain today. Because life is not shaped only by what happens to us, but by what happens inside of us. Modern psychology would later give language to what Frankl observed intuitively. Our emotional responses are not determined directly by events. This should be liberating if you ask me. But you see, our emotional reactions are determined by how we interpret those events. Let me ground this in a simple everyday example. Give an example of two students who fail an exam. Same lecturer, same paper, same marking scheme. But the first student says, "This proves that I'm not smart enough." That's the way he chooses to look at the failure. And the second student says to himself, "This hurts, but now I know what I must fix." And I know some of you who've dabbled in the concept of growth mindset and fixed mindset are already having a field day. But now we're looking at it in a different angle. See, the same failure, but two entirely different emotional trajectories. What determines the difference is not the exam itself, but the meaning assigned to it. In psychological terms, emotional distress arises not directly from events, but from the appraisals we attach to them. Cognitive behavioral research consistently shows that beliefs mediate emotional outcomes. Or more simply put, it's not the situation, it's the interpretation of the situation. Events do not enter our lives raw. You see, they pass through belief systems first. This is where we need to slow down socially. You see, we say phrases like, "I understand," very quickly. A woman loses a child. Someone trying to comfort her says, "I understand, I lost my mother too." Now, there is no ill intent here, but psychologically speaking, something important is missed. You see, both losses are real. Both are devastating, but they are not the same experience. The woman didn't lose a person. She lost an imagined future, a role, an identity, a rhythm of life that no longer exists. Psychological research emphasizes that subjective meaning carries more emotional weight than objective similarity, and that's something that we all need to know on a fundamental level. So when we say "I understand," what we often mean is I can imagine how I would feel if this happened to me. And that is not the same thing, you see, because while pain is universal, suffering, I'm afraid, is personal. Consider another familiar scenario. This is an anecdote a friend of mine used to share far too frequently for me to forget. He used to tell me of a story of two siblings. These were twins who were born and raised in a dysfunctional family. They did not have a mother. They had a father who took to the bottle most of the days. And so he was a drunkard man. He was rarely there to raise them. Basically, the kids raised them themselves, and now see both these kids with the same parent, same neglect and same instability. One of them grows up to think, my childhood ruined me. And the other one grows up to say, my childhood taught me who I refuse to become. Same environment, different outcomes. Same conditions, different results. Now, this is crucial. This does not mean one was stronger or smarter or morally superior. It means their minds processed pain differently. Contemporary trauma research shows that psychological outcomes depend on multiple interacting factors. The first one being timing and developmental stage. The second one being perceived meaning. The third one being emotional support. And the last one being how the experience was cognitively organized. We are not entirely at the mercies of circumstances. We may have little to no control actually over them, but we control how they affect us. Because you see, while pain is inevitable, long-term psychological injury is not automatic. And that's not blame. That's possibility. Let's make this even more concrete. You see, two people survived the same car accident. These guys were in the same vehicle the time the car accident happened. One develops panic whenever they hear screeching brakes. The other becomes cautious, but not fearful. Why? Because the brain is a learning system, and this is something we ought to derive it in our minds. One brain encoded the experience as the world is a dangerous place, and I am not safe, I'm unsafe. The other encoded it as accidents happen, and I survived. Neither chose this cautiously. But here's the hopeful truth. What the brain learns, the brain can relearn. And here's the science that makes all of this more than just philosophy. Neuroplasticity. You see, neuroplasticity refers to the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new neural connections throughout life. So this happens from the time you are born to the time that you are dead. And here are the key findings. Functional MRI studies show that repeated cognitive reframing alters activity in the amygdala, the alarm system of the brain, and the prefrontal cortex, reducing emotional reactivity. Now, this is based on some research that was carried out by Oxner and others. Long-term CBT has also shown to produce measurable structural and functional brain changes comparable to medication in anxiety and depression. Now, this is groundbreaking. Even trauma-related neural patterns can be modified through meaning-based interventions, narrative processing, and relational safety. Now, in other words, what we are saying is that experience wires the brain. Meaning strengthens the wiring, but repetition and reinterpretation can rewire it. Frankl observed this before neuroscience could measure it. Meaning doesn't erase pain, but it changes how pain is stored, processed, and even carried forward. And that's where hope lives. What's amazing to know, however, is the fact that the Bible delineates this point very well. Proverbs chapter 4 verse 23 reads in some versions, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. Now, in the Hebrew text, the word translated as heart is the Hebrew word lev. This is important because in biblical thought, the heart is not primarily the seat of emotions. Neither is it the pump that is pumping in the chest cavity. Lev refers to the inner control center of a person, the mind, the will, the reasoning faculties, the place where meaning is formed. In other words, the heart is where interpretation happens. And the verb translated as guard comes from the Hebrew natsar, a word that is used for active intentional protection, the kind of guarding a watchman performs over a city gate. Now, this is not passive awareness, no. It is deliberate vigilance. And why is this so? Well, it is so because the text says, from it flows the issues of life. The phrase issues of life literally refers to the outgoings, springs, or sources, like water flowing from a well. The biblical picture is this: life does not flow into us randomly. Rather, life flows out of us from the meanings we store, protect, and reinforce from within. Now, this is a profoundly psychological claim. Scripture is saying, number one, guard your heart. Guard what you allow to shape your interpretations. Number two, be careful what meanings take residence in the world that is inside you, because your behaviors, emotions, relationships, and future decisions will emerge from there. Or stated in a modern language, your nervous system responds not just to events, but to the story your heart tells about those events. This is where Proverbs and Frankl meet. You see, Frankl observed that meaning determines survival. Cognitive psychology, however, shows that appraisal determines emotion. And neuroscience shows that repeated interpretations shape neural pathways. And Proverbs says, centuries earlier, protect the place where meaning is formed, because that place determines the direction and trajectory of your life. So when scripture tells us to guard the heart, it is not calling us to emotional suppression. No, nothing can be further away from the truth than that. It is calling us to unintentional meaning making, to choose again and again what we allow suffering, failure, trauma, pain, loss to mean to us. Not because pain isn't real, but because meaning is powerful. And from it, everything else flows. So how should this change the way we show up for one another? Firstly, we stop comparing pain, because pain is not relative. Pain is experienced absolutely. Secondly, we replace I understand with something more accurate, more humane. I can't fully understand, but I'm here. Help me understand what this has been like for you. Or maybe you can say, your experience matters, even if I can't fully enter it. That shift alone increases psychological safety. Healing does not require perfect insight. It requires presence without assumption. Now, two people can go through the same situation and be affected very differently, because events shape us through meaning, not through force. We are not blank slates. We are not identical nervous systems, and we are not doomed by what happens to us. Your experience influenced you, but they did not write your final chapter. And the most human thing we can offer one another is not I understand, but rather I am willing to listen. Now, this particular episode is the first of a series that we intend to do on this channel that will look at how we look at and process pain, in a sense, I guess. So be sure to check out our next videos, our subsequent videos in this particular series. Also, I would encourage you to find this book and buy this book. It would do you a world of good. And I might not refer to it later in the future, but chances are fair I might refer to it again. But all in all, just look for the book. It's a great book. And as usual, this has been Cuthbert, your theologian and psychologist, and I hope to see you again.